In this video, we're going to look at the two great Greek comedians, the masters of Old and New Comedy. The first of these is Aristophanes, a slightly younger man than Euripides, writing comedy at about the same time and sometimes satirizing Euripides, Sophocles the playwright, and especially Socrates the philosopher. We don't know just a ton about Aristophanes, his personal life. He seems to have started writing plays when he was a very young man, 17 or 18 years old, when he achieved his first victory. And we know that he had 3 sons, all of whom became playwrights and won victories as comedians themselves, though we don't have any of their plays left. But other than that, he seemed not to have lived a very public life. He seemed to have been a fairly private individual, staying out of politics for the most part, just making fun of politicians. So what we know mostly about him, we only know through his work and his 11 surviving plays. The oldest of these, that is the one he wrote earliest in his life, the Ionians, is a very, very simple and sort of silly play about a farmer and his family in the middle of a war between Athens and Sparta, who decides that he's just going to cut a separate peace, make a separate peace with the Spartans. The joke is that peace is easily possible. Anyone could have made peace, but everybody in the city of Athens is working hard, buoying each other up and telling each other they need to stick with the war. And so even though peace would be simply achieved, they don't achieve it, and that's what he's satirizing in this play. About 4 or 5 years later, he wrote the play The Knights, which is a vicious satire of the ruler of the city of Athens at the time, and especially the way in which this ruler tended to surround himself with silly yes-men. You see a contemporary production here, and you can tell that the yes-men are, from their props, quite silly figures. One of his more famous plays is The Clouds. It is named after his chorus, which actually play clouds in the sky. This comedy is a satire of Socrates, in fact, a satire of philosophy and learning in general, as in they have their head in the clouds, about how they're not very realistic. When they're studying philosophy, they're only interested in egg-headed arcane matters. He wrote another play with another one of these unusual choruses, The Wasps. The play is actually about the legal profession, and the wasps, which buzz around and have a long chorus consisting almost entirely of buzzing sounds, are the lawyers who hang out at the Palace of Justice, trying to seek business any way they can, but are just going, they have nothing of substance to say. Is the thematic point behind this comedy. Peace is an allegory about a man who is flies on a beetle's back up into the sky in order to spy on the gods, where he discovers that they have trapped the goddess Peace separately down in a well, and he manages to release her, and everything on earth instantly becomes peaceful. Another one of his satires about the ongoing wars and the ridiculousness of the wars of Athens. This is a play that has been long out of favor, but over the last couple of decades, as America has become more and more involved in wars in the Mideast that seem difficult to understand or sometimes even nonsensical to the average citizen, Peace is a play that has gotten more and more attention. The birds was written during a period in which a tyrant, a demagogue, had taken over the city of Athens and was very, very dangerous to speak out. And this is a play that I think has a kind of cowardice about it. It's a silly play about the way in which the birds are recruited to create a kingdom that separates men from the gods. Their kingdom is called Cloud Cuckoo Land, where everything is topsy-turvy and backwards, but in essence they are just blocking the communication of men and gods. But it's not a very keen satire, it's a very frightened satire, a play aimed at being silly without offending anyone. Lysistrata is maybe the most famous play of Aristophanes now, a play which in his time was meant to be completely ridiculous, but in our time is hailed for it being a feminist predecessor. Lysistrata is the story of how the women of Athens become tired of the war with Sparta, and they decide that they will withhold sex from the men of the city until they stop the war. The men of the city, however, argue that they must fight to defend the honor of the city until the women make a treaty with the women of Sparta, who agree to do the same thing to their husbands, and all of these men who are cut off from sex instantly change their mind about the value of war. Thesmophoriazouze, a word that literally means priestesses of Demeter, but is often translated as something like women take over the festival. This is another one of the plays written during a very dark and very dangerous time. In this play, the priestesses of Demeter are actually figures of fun. They're made fun of, as is the playwright Euripides, who is thought of as being too much a women's mouthpiece. But again, it's a play that takes a very, very safe line. Women were already highly disempowered during this period in Athens, and Euripides was already out of favor, at least temporarily. So there are no real targets in this play. It's an easy play trying to get some cheap laughs. The Frogs is a wonderful and intriguing play, remade into a contemporary musical by Stephen Sondheim that follows the plot of Aristophanes' original quite closely. It's a play that we're going to look at more closely in a separate video that you'll be able to find here in the stacks. Ecclesiazouze, Women in Congress, is a play that imagined something completely impossible in Greek life, that women somehow snuck into the parliament, the Congress, the Senate, whatever we would now call the governing body of Athens, in disguise, but managed to take it over. And of course, they are instantly much more sensible than their male counterparts and make the city smarter, better, stronger. This is an idea that was considered completely ridiculous, silly, and funny because of its complete impossibility, but an idea, a play which we now find more interesting because, once again, it actually has a proto-feminist theme, though I'm not at all sure that's what Aristophanes intended. Wealth, the last play that we have from Aristophanes, is a very simple allegory. The character Plutus, whose name means wealth, is an old blind man who stumbles around until he is befriended by a very simple farmer who cures his blindness. And once Plutus becomes cured of his blindness, he rewards the just with wealth, and the unjust are punished by becoming broke. And this, of course, was considered a silly, hysterically funny idea that somehow how much money you have has anything to do with goodness or badness. And I'm afraid in our time may still have a little bit of currency for the same reason. The other playwright that we're going to look at is Menander. We know much more about Menander's life than we know about Aristophanes. We know that he comes from a very good family. We know who his teacher was. But Menander, like Aristophanes, chose a very private life. He was summoned a couple of times into public life and turned it down. He said he didn't want to be a politician. He preferred to live on his country estate with his mistress. His big rival in his time was a man named Philemon, another playwright who was very well known. And there's a story that Menander and Philemon were rivals for the love of Menander's mistress, that she was constantly choosing between them. But this seems to be allegorical, more a story made up about their professional rivalry than a fact about their private lives. But it's a little hard to tell. Menander died in his 50s. I mean, he died younger than you would expect. The story is that he drowned in a bath. But he was certainly a very, very active playwright in his time. We know 120 titles of plays that he wrote. And heartbreakingly, because we have some commentary about many of these plays, 30 or 40 of them seem to have still been in print and well known as late as 1100 AD. But they are all lost now, except for one, Daiskalos, a title that means the Grouch, that was found in an almost complete copy. There's 6 or 7 lines that appear to be missing. That was recovered in Egypt in a papyrus in 1957. So stunningly recently. This gives all of us hope that work might continue to show up over long periods of time, that we thought of as lost from the ancient world. But as it is, we only have this one play. This is a simple play, a story about a young man whose path towards his true love is blocked by a father figure who is just grouchy, who just doesn't want anybody else to be happy. This is a pattern of new comedy that we'll discuss in much greater detail when we look at the play Pseudolus by Plautus, which is said to be based on an original by Menander.